The Christian Youth Channel recently put out a video explaining why they felt that creationism was a better explanation for biodiversity than evolution. Let's take a look.
What's up, CYC? This is Josh here, back again with another message in our apologetic series. This week we have a very fun one to go over, but we're going to be tackling evolution this week. So we're going to call it Evolution v. Christianity, and we'll let the jury decide who wins.
What jury? Science and the nature of the universe should not be decided by who's the best orator, but rather, what does the evidence show? And so far, there has been no evidence to prove the claims of Christianity, or really the existence of any deity. Also, if you're calling it Evolution v. Christianity, you might want to edit your page. Nothing wrong with a mistake like that. Honestly, I do things like that myself from time to time.
But before we go into evolution, I want to let you guys know that there is a definition and a word for believing what we believe in Christians that debunk evolution, and that's called creationism. Creationism is the belief that the creation story in the Old Testament or Hebrew Bible book of Genesis is literally true and is akin to a scientific explanation for the creation of the earth and the development of life.
Cool claim, bro. What evidence do you have to support it? You can't say that the claims of the Bible are akin to a scientific explanation when they're just that, claims. A scientific explanation requires evidence that points to the truth of a claim. Your claim that an intelligent creator being is responsible for both the creation of the earth and the biodiversity of organisms is quite an extraordinary claim, and as such, requires extraordinary evidence. If that's your belief, that's fine. But remember that belief, on its own, can't debunk anything. People can believe whatever they want, but belief doesn't change anything real. I can believe with every ounce of my being that a huge heaping plate of poutine is good for me. But that belief in no way makes a meal of deep-fried potatoes, gravy, and cheese curds anywhere near as healthy as a plate of celery. If you want to debunk something, then you need evidence, not just belief that it's wrong.
That is a very long definition, so let me just say the creationism means that we believe exactly what the Bible says, and we believe it is true, word for word, verbatim, and there are no gray areas. Now, evolution, on the other hand, is kind of different. And evolution, in a sense, is the belief that human species derive from non-human species, from molecule to man. And this concept was created or theorized. I need to say theorized because we all know what a theory is, right? It's a supposition or an idea of something that may or may not exist.
First off, do you understand what a scientific theory is? You seem to be using the colloquial version of theory, meaning a guess. In scientific terms, a theory is an explanation of an observed phenomena that has been repeatedly tested and verified. Scientists don't just say, well, I think this is it, and I'm wearing a lab coat, so you must believe me. They have to show evidence their theories are true. Now, I'll be the first to admit that any scientific theory could be wrong, and many have. New information could come to disprove any theory we have, or provide a better explanation. Theories are basically the best explanation we have right now. But if new evidence is brought forward to change the scientific consensus, then honest scientists should be willing to go where that evidence takes us. What you're describing as a theory is more akin to a hypothesis. Evolution has moved beyond that in the scientific canon. It has been shown over and over again that organisms have small genetic differences from their parents, and if these differences allow the organism to thrive, then they are passed on to the next generation. As a side note, evolution is not just about humans. It encompasses an attempt to explain all biological diversity on the planet.
And Darwinism is a theory of biological evolution developed by the English naturalist Charles Darwin. And you'll see a picture of Charles Darwin right here. It looks kind of creepy.
Yeah, because we all know it's how people look that determines the validity of their claims. Einstein? Pfft. Sure, he claims to have some ideas about the nature of physics, but look at that hair. That's what we need to focus on. How someone looks has absolutely no bearing on how accurate their claims are. I mean, I could try to dismiss your arguments in the same way you dismiss Darwin by saying that you look like the bastard love child of Kenny G and Carrot Top. First off, that would be petty and mean of me, and I'm above that. And second, it wouldn't mean anything in regards to your arguments. So, I wouldn't dare mention how I expect you to break out the prop comedy while playing some smooth jazz saxophone. Do we really want to get to the point where you should only listen to somebody if they're aesthetically pleasing? Right, I guess. Scientific discoveries are not accepted or dismissed based on the looks of the person making them, but rather the evidence behind the conclusions they draw. We have evidence that mutations cause organisms to be born slightly different from their parents, and these changes build up over generations, eventually leading to speciation. What evidence do you have for your claims of an intelligent deity behind, well, everything?
He literally believed that humans weren't created by God. He literally just theorized the basic evolution. And then along the lines, over the years and years and years, just like all theories, more ideas got thrown onto that theory and it stuck. Like the idea that we come from a rock, or we evolutionized from a rock or a worm or whatever.
It's funny you bring up worms. Scientists recently found what was believed to be one of the oldest ancestors of humans, and many other animals, the Acari wariotea. It was a tiny worm-like creature, like you said, that is one of the oldest bilaterally symmetrical organisms ever found, with a distinct front and back end. It was a major biological discovery. Now, Darwin was not the first to posit that organisms came from previously distinct ancestors. The idea that species change over time was accepted by ancient Greeks, Romans, and even medieval Islamic thinkers. What set Darwin apart was the fact that he worked out the mechanism for such change, natural selection. In a nutshell, organisms are slightly different from their parents. If this change is useful to the organism in some way, making it a little faster or better camouflaged, for example, then it will be more likely to breed and pass on that change. Over generations, these changes build up enough to result in new species. Additions to the theory of evolution are not just thrown on. When things are added to our understanding, such as horizontal gene transfer, for example, it isn't just a guess, and scientists don't just say, hey, let's throw it on the pile. But rather, research and study before any new hypotheses are claimed to be correct.
So I have a little illustration to kind of debunk that already, because a lot of their problems with what we believe that God brought man out of dust, Adam, is that they look across the board of all species that are alive, living, breathing organisms, and people notice, which is true, we all have similarities in our biological makeup, whether it's our skeletons, our blood, the oxygen we need, the vitamins we need. We all have similarities in all organisms all across the board. So people think because of that we evolved from the most basic one of those life structures, or whatever you call it. And because we all have similarities, that we all come from one and none of us were created or meant to be different, because they see the similarities in our chemical and biological makeup, they believe that we all stem from one singular non-human species. But I believe, and many Christians believe, that we stem from, and we all have the similarities in our biological makeup and chemicals and the things we need, nutrients we need, and all this stuff, is because we have the same handprint, which means we were made and created from the same creator. They don't see that, but that's what we believe.
Go ahead and believe it, but what is the evidence for it? I would rather accept what can be proven and admit when I don't know something than blindly embrace a claim that has no evidence behind it. You are correct that just because some organisms look similar doesn't mean they're closely related. In an earlier video, I talked about convergent evolution. That is, organisms living in similar environments tend toward looking similar because they're given the same environmental pressures. For instance, birds, bats, and pterodactyls are genetically separated, but have similar shapes because that's the best shape for flight. But it's not just similarities in organisms that points to evolution being true. If you look at the fossilized remains that we have found, comparing the location and, more importantly, the age of the fossils, you can see a slow but gradual change over time, linking vastly different organisms. We can see the slow change in fossils over time, going from simple creatures to more complex ones. We done? Good. but you had an illustration you wanted to use?
If we take a look at some of the most modernized inventions now, we'll look at the Apple products for now. And if you take a look right on the screen, you'll see the first iPod ever created. And then you'll go along and you'll see an iPod Nano, and then you'll see an iPod Touch, and then you'll see the iPhone 3GS. You guys never seen this one, but this thing you could throw through a brick wall and it would still work. And then you'll see the iPhone 5, and you start to see the designs start to change, and then you'll see the iPhone 8 or whatever, and then you'll see the new iPhone 11 Pro Max or whatever you call it, I don't know. But basically, the same similarities in the iPod Touch, you see variations of those in the new iPhone. They're capable of holding music and listening to music with headphones and all this stuff. But that doesn't mean they're the same exact thing. Yes, they serve similar functions and do similar things, and that's why, because they were created by the same creator. Not because they're the same thing or one literally formed that iPod Shuffle, that stick iPod Shuffle formed and evolved into iPod Nano, and then it grew and grew and grew. No, it was created specifically each time to have similarities and differences and different functions, all by the same creator. So I wanted to use that illustration to make that real for you.
There's one small problem with your analogy. iPods and other similar music players like these do not reproduce. That's one of the fundamental aspects of biological evolution. Replication with slight variation.
I'm a poet and didn't even know I was rhyming those words, but it happened anyway.
If you take a handful of old iPods and leave them together, they will not create new iPods that are similar but with minute changes. One of the driving forces of biological evolution is that between generations, organisms are slightly different from their parents. These changes build up over generations and result in new species over time. The iPods in your example don't. Remember, just because one thing was designed doesn't mean that everything was designed. We can accept the idea of an item such as a digital music player being made by people because we have evidence of man-made items and, well, evidence of people. If you want to attribute a deity as the creator and designer of biological diversity, you need to show that deity exists first. Remember Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is usually the best one. Evolution doesn't need to assume the existence of a designer in order to explain biodiversity, but creation has to posit the existence of a creator that we have no evidence for. Show the evidence for such a creator, and we'll have to follow where that evidence goes.
Here's where the rubber meets the road right here. Evolution is all about biblical illiteracy and inerrancy, which is the real epidemic now in the world.
Right. There's a massive pandemic going on that is incredibly contagious and not only killing in record numbers, but also leaving survivors with massive long-term medical issues, but not being well versed in ancient claims that go against any scientific understanding of the world. That's the real epidemic. Glad your priorities are in order.
There are Christians in this world that believe in evolution, and then they believe that Jesus Christ died on the cross for us and then rose to give us eternal salvation. But let me tell you, if you are a Christian, if you don't believe in Genesis 1:1, then you don't believe in John 3:16. If you believe that God sent his son and he walked amongst us and he died on the cross and rose from the dead, then you need to believe that God rose Adam out of the dust and he was divinely and directly and purposely created.
If you want to believe that, that's fine. I would never think of taking that away from you. But if you want to be intellectually honest and believe the Bible is inerrant, then you have to reconcile your beliefs with the fact that the observable world does not comply with the claims of the Bible. Some of the big stories, such as Noah's Ark, contradict what we know of the world. The volume and pressure needed to produce a worldwide flood would have rendered the planet uninhabitable by just about all land-based creatures, and what would have gotten off the boat would not have been enough to sustain any kind of population. Plus, a flood that would have covered the world would have, both by definition and design, destroyed the other civilizations out there. But we have uninterrupted historical records of civilizations like Egypt and China that were definitely not wiped out. As you said, there are Christians out there who can reconcile the fact that evolution occurred and still believe their deity exists. They simply regulate the unbelievable stories in the Bible to fables meant to convey a parable to the readers. They're able to accept that humans evolved and think that thanks to God's sacrifice to himself, I guess, they can enter the kingdom of heaven. Who are you to tell these people what they're allowed to believe?
People don't believe in God because of evolution, which is funny to me because evolution never directly goes against God.
My unacceptance of the claims of a deity have nothing to do with evolution. I say I don't believe there's a God because I haven't been given any evidence that there is one. However, there was a point in my life where I didn't accept the claims of the existence of God or evolution. My issue with evolution was that I didn't think mutations would happen enough to cause all the biodiversity on the planet. But at the same time, I didn't think there was evidence for a God either. Now, I did my research and talked to experts, which helped me understand how often mutations occur and how quickly they can move through a population. New information was brought to my attention that caused me to update my understanding. What evidence can you supply to help change my understanding on the existence of a deity?
Like, you can't say I believe in evolution and I don't believe in God because evolution makes God not real, but that's not really the case. Evolution doesn't go out of its way to disprove God. It doesn't even go out of the way to disprove anything. Evolution just doesn't line up with the Word of God. It doesn't specifically go up against it like the Big Bang Theory did, when the whole purpose of the Big Bang Theory was to prove that life was possible without God.
No, it's not. Like evolution, the Big Bang does not state anything about the existence of any kind of creator being. The Big Bang simply states there was a massive expansion of heat and energy about 13.8 billion years ago. We have evidence that this occurred. The most easily found is the background cosmic radiation, which we can use to pinpoint the age of the universe. Our understanding of Big Bang nucleosynthesis gives an understanding of how this energy coalesced into simple elements like hydrogen, helium, and lithium. But it says nothing about how life is possible without God. Actually, it says nothing to prove life is possible at all.
But let me tell you a few things that kind of drop the mic on you to make you kind of understand what evolution's about and why it doesn't make sense. When you go and you're faced with the task of debunking evolution or standing up for what you believe in, when you get to the point where you know someone who believes in evolution, you need to ask them one thing, and I need to ask you one thing, and you can ask me the same thing. What do you mean by evolution? Because there are 3 different variations of evolution. The first one is evolution, which means change over time. Do I believe in change over time? Personally, yes, of course I do.
You are right. Evolution does simply mean change over time. Lots of things change or evolve. People's political views, stars, common designs of commercial music players. As they say, the only constant is change. So,
you are technically correct. The best kind of correct.
But on its own, these days, when people simply say evolution, it's often shorthand to mean Darwinian biological evolution via natural selection. It's the same as how when I talk about the LGBTQIA+ community in my videos supporting them, that I usually refer to the LGBT community. This does not mean that I'm deliberately excluding intersex, asexual, or any other members of the sexual spectrum, but is simply using it as a shorthand to denote all members of those orientations.
Microevolution, small adaptations to your body's chemistry. Do I believe in microevolution? Yes, I do. Microevolution is small adaptations to your body, like when you get sick so many times because your immune system's down, the doctor constantly prescribes you antibiotics or ibuprofen, and there comes a certain time when your body starts to reject it and it no longer works. That's a small adaptation in your body.
Now you're getting away from the scientific understanding of evolution. A change in an individual organism after birth is not part of evolutionary theory. What you're describing is similar to Lamarckian evolution, a concept that was discredited a long time ago that dealt with acquired characteristics.
Alternative theories to Darwinian evolution. You mean Lamarckian evolution?
Microevolution is simply genetic changes in an organism it was born with that make it slightly different from its parents, yet still able to interbreed with the rest of that population. A butterfly that has a slightly different wing pattern than the rest of the population was born into, but still able to breed with them, will be an example of microevolution. If this small change is beneficial to survival, it will be passed on to its progeny. Ironically, you did bring up an example of evolution without realizing it. Antibiotic immunity is not your body suddenly rejecting antibiotics, but rather the bacteria mutating and becoming resistant to the current antibiotics. Not every bacterium will mutate, but if even one bacterium mutates to be more resilient to the current antibiotic, it will be able to thrive in the host body, and this new strain will outcompete the other bacteria that are not resistant to the antibiotics.
Macroevolution, on the other hand, is molecules to man without intelligence. That we started as molecules and formed and evolved and grew hands and whatever. We came from monkeys without any recollection of where intelligence came into the picture. That is macroevolution. Do I believe in that? No. Darwinism is macroevolution, which doesn't make sense.
Let's clear this up as well. Macroevolution is more accurately known as speciation. As noted above, mutations occur between generations, resulting in slight variations of the genetic code of the offspring. The hell was that? What a Mickey Mouse operation we got here. If the mutation assists the organism in some way that makes it more likely to survive and breed, then that organism will be more likely to survive and breed, and the beneficial mutation will spread through the population. In general, as these mutations build up over generations, the genetic code of the population changes enough that it is no longer able to breed with the original population. Once this happens, we can say that speciation, or macroevolution, has occurred.
Because evolutionists believe that you can form from molecules and become a man, and we can evolve from different life forms to the next, to eventually human species, because you can mutate DNA. But let me tell you, DNA doesn't even determine or give you your body structure. DNA just determines the proteins in your body, and there's been scientific studies of people that can, mutate DNA, and it's amazing, groundbreaking stuff. To get a new body plan or a structure isn't even about DNA. It's about epigenetics, which determines the structures of your cell, which build up your body, which there is no way to possibly mutate it. So Darwinism's theory on evolution through adaptation of DNA based on natural selection makes no sense after that, when you consider that DNA has nothing to do with the genetic body structure that we have, and that DNA does not even determine it.
The reason it makes no sense to you is that you're spitting out biological terms that you obviously have no understanding of. Look, technobabble is great for fictional stories.
This is what makes time travel possible. The flux capacitor.
It looks like the neutrinos coming from the sun have mutated into a new kind of nuclear particle.
He'd have to heat the cube to 120 million Kelvin just to break through the Coulomb barrier.
Unless Selbig has figured out how to stabilize the quantum tunneling effect.
But if your intent is to educate people, you might want to learn what you're talking about first. Now, let's talk about how humans and other animals form. Grab a coffee. This might get a bit long, and even in this case, I'm simpling it down. Yes, DNA does dictate how proteins in the body form, which determines how a cell develops. It's paracrine signaling, which tells the DNA what proteins should be made and where and at what times the proteins will form as an organism develops. This is just scratching the surface, but chemical signals in the developing fetus dictate which cells will become what. If an area of the new embryo receives a certain amount of hormone X and a certain amount of hormone Y, that instructs the DNA to produce the proteins needed for heart muscle cells, for example. In other parts of the body, the DNA will get the signal to produce bone cells. It's a very intricate process that has developed over time. Now, DNA can tell the cells how to create every protein the body needs. Changes in the DNA between generations result in cells forming slightly differently. Muscles that are a bit stronger, bones that are a bit lighter, and changes in the paracrine signaling process can form a body differently. What is being done with epigenetics is basically studying how to cause DNA to produce protein in cells that don't normally produce those proteins. For instance, causing what should be skin cells to produce bone proteins. But, unlike what a lot of woo peddlers are claiming these days, it doesn't mean that we can create any form you want. It's limited to the protein that the organism's DNA can already make.
Any living creature on Earth, we all have genetic limitations. We can use our minds and science and whatever we want to try and breed dogs to whatever kind of breed we want, chapoodles or whatever, chihuahuas and everything like that, and big dogs and bigger dogs and tiny dogs and teacup chihuahuas. But no matter what, we cannot break the genus of dogs. It will always be a dog. Just like you can have a big mommy and a little daddy and it makes a medium-sized person, but it's always gonna be a person. It will always be human species that cannot be broken. There are genetic limitations on all living organisms.
Yes, every organism will have offspring that knock it off. Offspring that are genetically similar to their parents. However, they will not be complete clones. As I've said, genetic mutations occur between generations. This has been measured and observed. My kids were born with My kids were born with a handful of mutations that separate them both from me and their mother. I have several mutations that separate me from my parents. They have mutations that separate them from their parents. If we go back far enough in our genetic lineage, we would find something that we would not consider human at all, but still a primate. Go back further and further, and we'll eventually get back to a common ancestor like Icaria warietia that I mentioned earlier, and even further back, basic, self-replicating molecules. Nobody expects an organism to be born a completely different species from their parents, but rather, small changes, guided by natural selection, will slowly, but eventually over time, build up to completely new organisms and body structures. To take your dog example, let's say we take a population of modern dogs, separate them, and put them in an environment that was difficult to survive in. Those dogs would evolve to thrive in that environment, but would still be able to interbreed with other dogs for a while. But after many generations, mutations would build up, and over enough time, that population would be as physiologically and genetically distinct from modern dogs as modern dogs are from their ancestor Dormilolocon latori.
Life came from God and didn't evolve before God or outside of God.
Cool claim, bro. What evidence do you have of this God? Seriously, what evidence do you have to support the claim there's an intelligent creator being out there?
Scientists will say, give me enough time and we'll find evidence that evolution is real, because they don't have concrete proof or evidence yet. That is taking a stance of faith. That's a faith stance. Give me enough time and I promise you it'll become real, or I'll show you and I believe that it's gonna happen.
We have tons of evidence that evolution is real. We don't need to wait for it. The Lenski experiments show that simple E. coli bacteria mutate, and if that mutation is beneficial, then those mutated bacteria will thrive. We know that organisms change. That's not a stance based on faith. It's one that has evidence behind it.
But that doesn't make sense, right? That they can say that and it be anything debunking what we believe, because we can tell them, just have faith and just wait and God will show up in your life, and there's no hope for them believing in that, right?
But again, we have evidence that evolution is responsible for the observed biodiversity. We don't need to wait to find evidence. Darwin spent years before publishing his book to make sure the evidence he found supported his claim that organisms evolved due to the environmental pressures they find themselves under.
Whatever is made up of space, matter, and time cannot be made by space, matter, and time. Which goes back to the Big Bang Theory. The universe could not create itself.
Yes, and the Big Bang Theory doesn't say the universe created itself. As I mentioned earlier, the Big Bang is simply the rapid expansion of the universe. It doesn't say what happened before this expansion, or even if there was a before as we understand it. We don't know why the universe exists. If an intelligent being caused it, I would love to know that. But so far, we don't have any evidence for one. If you do have evidence, not simply, I can't think of any other way it could have happened other than what's in my book of claims, but actual evidence, I would love to hear it so I can get a better understanding of the universe.
Which started out as just density and heat, did not create density and heat and make a universe out of that. I cannot create myself, no matter how bad I try. Whatever is made up of space, matter, and time cannot be made by space, matter, and time. It has to be made by something operating outside of space, matter, and time. A lot of other things that evolution cannot explain, which gives Christians a real problem even trying to believe what they believe, is evolution cannot explain the creation of the universe, the creation of first life.
That's because evolution has nothing to do with those. Evolution says nothing about how the universe began or how life started. It simply deals with the change in biodiversity. Look, we don't know, and most likely will never know for sure, what caused the universe, or how abiogenesis began. But just because we don't know what started everything, that doesn't mean we should simply slot "God done it" into the gaps of our knowledge. I would rather be honest with myself and say, I don't know what caused these things, but I'm open to look at new evidence and I'm willing to be convinced if such evidence can be obtained. But I won't just blindly accept claims that have no basis for them or actively go against what we understand about the world.
the objective moral values, so what's right or what's wrong, or how do we determine what's right or what's wrong. They cannot explain consciousness, laws of logic, how personality can arise from non-personality. You mean to tell me that at one point in the world that a molecule existed and then somehow evolved into me, the funniest, most humorous guy in the world that has the most amazing personality in this head of hair? It is impossible. Evolution cannot explain how mind can come from matter without intelligence.
Why not? Our ancestors were simple tool users living in groups. An advanced brain was an advantage to their survival. It's assumed that for whatever reason, our ape ancestors had to move from the trees to the plains, a location they were not developed well for. However, apes, like us, are simple tool users. Now, when introduced to a new environment, the axiom is adapt or die. We adapted and focused on that tool-using ability, and natural selection therefore selected the offspring with bigger brains. Damn it! Humans are not the strongest or most dexterous animals out there, although, to be fair, our constitution score is surprisingly high. It makes sense that our brains developed in a way to understand and manipulate the world and work with our tribe. We developed our intelligence, wisdom, and charisma attributes as a way to compensate for our lacking physical attributes. Thanks.
Don't you know sarcasm?
As for morality, right and wrong, well, working together causes us to evolve empathy. It's easy to work with and trust one another if we can empathize with others in our tribe, so the groups that displayed empathy would thrive over those that didn't trust one another. Since I can empathize with others, I base my morality on the harm principle. Will my actions cause harm to another without any corresponding good coming from it? If an action causes harm with no good resulting from it, then it's immoral. My morality doesn't need a deity.
At what point during this evolution process did we create in ourselves the ability to think and make decisions and be intelligent and solve problems? It doesn't make sense like that. We were created to think and have moral reasoning and solve problems. That's how we were created.
Humans are not the only ones that are able to solve problems. Crows use displacement to raise water levels, which is basic problem solving. Apes, other than humans, use simple tools to reach food, like sticks to reach ants and grubs. But since problem solving and tool use was the best way for our ancestors to survive and thrive, the best problem solvers were able to have a better chance to pass on their genes, resulting in a somewhat niche category of organisms that are completely dependent on our problem solving to survive right now. It didn't magically appear, it's something that was built up over time.
We were created with a hole in our heart.
If you were born with a hole in your heart, that's a major medical condition. Trust me, I and my long-term viewers know all about that. Oh. Go on then.
We were created like that already. We didn't evolve from anything.
We may not know how self-replicating molecules first formed. There are a few hypotheses. Jeremy England's work showing how molecules replicate in order to dissipate excess heat seems to be a good stepping point. But we have observed how organisms can become more and more complex over generations. Mutations in germline cells cause an organism to be born slightly different from its parent. If these mutations are beneficial, they will be preserved by allowing the organism a better chance to survive and breed. All of these things have been shown to occur. Evidence that evolution via natural selection is the best explanation for the diversity of life, including human beings. If you want to convince people that any deity, let alone your specific one, exists, you need to show evidence that it does. What compelling evidence do you have that your deity exists?